Well, I'm here because I've been doing a lot of reading about reading research and how it can be used in instructional practice, writing research. I've become sort of a research junkie. I never was earlier in my life, but having seen what a difference it made, I really have become a devotee when it comes to research, and I'm just really eager to share some of the things I learned with you because it makes such a difference in teaching. First thing we're going to do is we're going to explore some evidence-based reading research that was done that had a huge impact on the field and certainly modified the way that reading is taught in adult literacy classrooms now. And we're also going to see how that research led to a real focus on the importance of level texts. This research pretty much did away with the one-text-fits-all classroom. And the change agent is especially useful in that regard because it's a collection of texts at different levels. And they've certainly worked hard here. Cynthia and her crew have worked very hard at leveling all the articles. This wasn't always done, but now every article is leveled using a readability formula. And there's attention paid to having a range of levels across those articles that are offered. And now we even have, with Ben's help, audio versions of a lot of those that the students can get to via the website. And so it just gives a lot more options to you, and it makes the change agent all the more classroom ready. If time allows, with some depth, we'll get into explicit instruction as a sort of a default instructional approach. This is a gem from K through 12 that's really made its way into our field. Any of our teachers who have been in the K through 12 world probably have used it. And so we'll look at it as a sort of a surefire instructional approach and sort of a template for setting up lesson plans. We've also we provided to you a very detailed lesson plan, way more detailed than you probably ever have seen. It wasn't meant to scare you. We just loaded in as much guidance and direction and detail as we could so that you could carry it away as a resource document and actually read it ahead of time if you've had an opportunity to kind of prepare your mind for what's coming ahead in the webinar. If you haven't had a chance to read the lesson plan, don't worry. It's just if you did, you'll probably get a little more out of it a little quicker if you had looked at it ahead of time. But this is the point where we're hoping that the evidence-based reading, the use of level texts, and the application of explicit instruction all come together in a lesson in a way that we're hoping you'll see as very, very effective, very, very powerful for students. We also will start touching on, we only have enough time in an hour, we don't have enough time to go into how you can start building out the activities we're talking about today to sort of meet the more rigorous requirements of the college and career readiness standards. But we'll have a couple of teaser ideas that will start moving you in that direction. So we will have a point for questions ahead. It's a packed webinar, so grab onto a pencil and note down any questions as they come. You can put them in. We'll give you a heads up when we're getting near a question period. And you always have the option of coming back to us through the email and asking us directly. Okay, let's look at evidence-based reading instruction, our first point for today. I'm going to focus on one particular study that had an enormous impact. And many of you may have heard about it already, but we're going to drill down, to use Cynthia's term, a little deeper than you might have if you've seen the results in passing. Around the year 2000, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and in partnership with World Education here, our home agency, conducted a study with 600 adult learners around 5 northeastern states and ran them through 2 to 4 hours, probably more like 4 hours of testing on the 4 components of reading. Those 4 components are alphabetics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Fluency and comprehension will be the illustrated activities we have today later on when we look at the lesson plan. So these tests were designed to figure out if students could sound out words, that's alphabetics, and especially multisyllabic words, if they could read through sentences with some level of smoothness and naturalness, almost like natural speech, that's fluency. At what level their vocabulary knowledge was, especially in words that normally appear in print, such as accommodate, coordinate, analyze, that don't often come up in normal everyday speech, but are everywhere in print, regardless of the content. And finally, comprehension. And comprehension in this case is not capital C comprehension, what do they come away with when they read something, but the array of strategies that are second nature to you, but not second nature to our students. In a second, I'm going to look at each one of these more closely, but let's keep moving along on the impact of the evidence-based reading instruction. The study also found that contrary to some popular belief, if a student took a TABE test or a CASAS test, and it was indicated that they're reading at the 5th grade level, that did not really get at the full story for that student. That student might be able to read a 5th grade level text very fluently, but she may not understand most of the vocabulary in it. She might also stumble over some of the alphabetics, the longer words, and maybe perhaps have a great deal of comprehension, but only with tremendous effort. So each student would have a different profile of strengths and weaknesses. And that is where, and also, I'm sorry, I almost forgot my own slide's next point, that you really can't go lean on any of these components. If a student cannot sound out words well, then he or she may not even get to the vocabulary or understand when they've reached a word that they know the definition of. Conversely, if they can sound out a word well, but they don't know what it means, that would hold them back too. If they read very smoothly through a passage at various levels, maybe even a high level, that's no guarantee that they have the different types of comprehension strategies at the ready that you and I use, like rereading, stopping and reflecting, and so forth. Now, all this means that if you're going to find out what the strengths and weaknesses of students, you need a more sensitive assessment instrument than a global instrument like TABE or CASAS. You have to get down and find out how the students are reading at the alphabetic, using alphabetic skills, fluency skills, where the vocabulary level is, and what kind of comprehension strategies they apply. And so all those are different, and all might require different level texts. Okay, while your brains are sort of spinning right now, let's stop, take a breath, and look at the 4 components again a little more, with a little more focus. Alphabetics is the first one. A student comes into goes into a text and comes upon the word accommodate, and they can say that word, accommodate, and they even put the stress in the right place. So they have a fairly high level of alphabetics. Their ability to be able to sound out words, especially multisyllabic words, is their alphabetic strength. If they can't do that, it's a weakness and must be worked on. Fluency, the ability to read sentences smoothly, watching for punctuation markers, navigating, chunking out phrases for subject phrases and verb and object phrases rather than interrupting them. And I always like to harken back to a great moment in one of my classes when a student first read like this from a level text of Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy's famous proclamation, "I would never dance with a woman whom I didn't know." Not fluent, but on the way. But what about if she could read it like natural speech, which she did not much later? "I would never dance with a woman whom I didn't know." The meaning unlocked by the student being able to read that with automaticity, with naturalness, is leagues different than just being able to phonetically move from capital I to the final period. So where is the student's fluency, and where do we need to work at them with that to bring it up to a very natural level with higher and higher level texts? Vocabulary, definitions of words. That's just simply the definition of a word, but more important, is words they don't normally hear but will see in print. So they may have heard the word accommodate, but let's say they didn't. And so when they come upon it, it would be good if they knew it's to provide room for someone. And even better if they knew a second definition, to do something helpful for someone. So this level of bringing in already vocabulary that they know, and when they sound it out properly and can immediately turn into meaning, will improve comprehension. But you have to find out where they are with that. And finally, how many, if any, strategies for active reading do they use? Here's just a few that we use. This is internalized for us. We reread when we stumble on something. We mark text up. We visualize as we read, and we tap into prior knowledge. There's dozens of these things. Well, that might be overstating it. There's at least a dozen different strategies that we use habitually that make it easier for us to comprehend and which students may not be using and must be taught how to use. Okay, now back to this again, evidence-based reading. All that was discovered by the reading component study and all the implications that we have to look at students as sets of different pockets of different skills, that we have to bring students' mastery up on all four of these areas, and that we have to figure out where to begin with them in classes to instruct for these different components. All this has been supported by K through 12 and other research, other adult research. And if you're finding yourself a little at sea with all I've laid on you here, you can go to a wonderful website, the Assessment Strategies and Reading Profiles website that World Education developed for LINCS. And all of this is explained in detail. Some of the diagnostic instruments that are out there, free and otherwise, are there, instructional approaches, and so forth. Okay. As I said, one of the big takeaways we hope you take away today is that there is an importance for understanding where the instructional level is for your students. What text should I use with them? And how will I know the text will be effective for instruction? Well, for fluency, their ability to read smoothly through sentences, you want to find a level that is challenging, but neither frustrating nor challenging and neither frustrating nor boring. This is where you see the one text or teaching to the middle, the one text fits all, or teaching to the middle, leaves a good portion of the students out, because in any given classroom, in our adult education classroom, the research shows that if you're using a mid-level text to try to move for the middle of the abilities of the students in the room, a number of students will be very bored and a number will be frustrated. And this goes to engagement. They won't stick with you. They'll be too frustrated to read, or they'll be too bored to pay attention. You want to find for each student, and really groups of students, a place where they're missing some punctuation, a level where they're missing some punctuation. They're a little trouble with the phrasing. The intonation is unnatural or flat. And that's what we call prosody, the sort of musical elements of reading a sentence. And then, or navigating a sentence, I should say. And then students who sometimes stumble over a few words, but not all the words. They just stumble a little bit, and that's their accuracy. They're not reading smoothly, but they're not frustrated. And they're not reading so easily that they're bored. So we're going to return to how you could figure that out. But that's the level you want to be working with your students. And the change agent offers you a range of levels so you can find that. Okay. Now what about, I'll give you an example then of what it might sound for an instructional level. Now somebody who's at a mastery level at GLE 6, this is from the change agent, and this is a grade level equivalent, 6th grade level text. So if the student's reading like this, my mother had 7 children, and she worked very hard to feed and educate us without any of our fathers by our side. Many times we went to school with our shoes torn and without lunch, or a little less smoothly like that, but still pretty convincing. They're not being tripped up by individual words, they're watching the punctuation, and they have a kind of a lilt and rhythm and a tone to the sentence. That student's reading, you don't want to keep giving text at that level to that student. It's not pushing their envelope. What if they read more like this? My mother had several children. They're guessing, several children, and she worked, skip the comma, and she worked, pauses because it's at the end of the margin, very hard to feed and educate us. I'm not trying to make fun of students. I'm just showing that this is GLE 6. This might be the right instructional level for this student because they're moving through it, but they're having some challenges. Us without any of our fathers, that's going to seem puzzling. They might default and say without our fathers by her side, or our father by her side, many times we, and so forth. They might throw in a word between without and lunch. It might just say without any lunch. They might interrupt a verb phrase. They don't give free lunch. If you get down to cornmeal and porridge, then you wouldn't really worry too much about that. They might be able to sound out cornmeal, and you might have to say the word porridge because it's so unfamiliar out loud. But you might have found a good instructional level for that student. She can handle it, but she needs practice, and it's certainly not automatic yet. Okay, well, let's go on now to instructional level for comprehension. What level? Well, we want the same thing. The level is challenging, neither frustrating nor boring. But here's the big thing that's sometimes very complicated about using levels for instruction and the new ways to teach math. And that is a student who reads a passage fluently at level 6, for example, may not be able to comprehend very well at level 6. You have to look at all of their different skills and abilities because you might have to switch out different levels as you're teaching different things. Hoping to show this is not as complicated as it first seems, and second of all, it's not the end of the world if a student is reading something too hard or too easy. You can always switch the text later on or in mid-class. So here is an example of where you might find the instructional level for comprehension. Student reads through a passage and has some idea of the text topic, but can't easily summarize it. He or she can recall some information, but might not distinguish between main ideas and details. She might say, oh, that passage we just read was about eating, but she might not get that it was really about the mother's efforts to keep the kids fed. And she may not be able to make accurate inferences. If you ask, for example, how many meals did the kids eat every day, she might say, oh, they had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He might miss that it was inferred, or implied rather, that the students didn't have lunch. They just ate breakfast and they ate dinner, and they had to sort of chow down hard on those 2 times a day to get through the day. So if you can find a level where the student's being pushed a bit but not totally confused, you're probably at a good instructional level for comp. Okay, now this all leads us to why you now have a challenge. You're a teacher, you're in the classroom, you've got students at different levels of reading, at different components, and you want to start designing practice and instruction for them, and you need level text to do it. Well, our pitch here is that you've got in front of you a magazine that has level text already in it. And Cynthia very shortly will show you where you find the text levels in the audios. So we think this is a great resource, and we've worked hard to bring it into this level of resourcefulness by picking texts that are engaging. First of all, this is immediately interesting to students. Food, finances, employment, so forth. This is the stuff students deal with. This is stuff we deal with. And so they're going to find it engaging. It's going to hold their interest. It's also written by students. Even then, it's something fairly compelling in itself. I'm going to catch up with my own slides here for 1 second, which I wasn't doing. Okay, here we go. And then texts are leveled so they can be used. It holds interest, first of all. They're also leveled so they can be used for diagnostic and instructional purposes. And let me explain what I mean by that. You can figure out what the student's different instructional level is for fluency or comprehension by having them look at different level articles. You'll know the article level they're looking at and reading. If it sounds challenging but not too challenging, that might be the level of text you're going to give them to practice with for the immediate future. Then, when you're actually in classes, you're going to group the students who are around the same instructional level. And if you went through the lesson plan, you could see pretty dramatically how that was done. Our sample teacher had 2 groups, low and high, for both fluency and for comprehension, and use different texts for that purpose. And the TCA was a good resource for that. You can also make sure that students are progressing. When a student reads, let's say a student begins at an instructional level 5 for fluency, and after 2 weeks, she's starting to read that level fluently, you're going to give her another higher level. Then she's going to read 6th grade level fluently, then 7th, then whoa, she's in the GED. Now, is this applicable for a GED class? It is. Maybe you're starting at 9, 10, or 11, but you can find out a good instructional place to start and then keep going up as they progress. Can you go backwards? Absolutely. If the student suddenly finds themselves challenged by reading aloud in a classroom, nervous, text anxiety, or whatever, you can go back to easier texts and then bring them back up again later. It's not that much of a science where it has to be followed, and there's damage to the student if you don't.